The auction bell rang through the crowded estate hall just as Evelyn noticed the dollhouse staring directly at her from the corner table. Its tiny windows reflected the ceiling lights like watchful eyes hidden behind dusty glass. The moment she stepped closer, the air around her felt strangely cold and heavy. Most buyers ignored the dollhouse because its wooden roof had partially collapsed with age. Thin cracks twisted across its faded Victorian walls, like old scars left behind by something violent. Yet Evelyn could not shake the feeling that the miniature house wanted her attention. The auctioneer explained the piece came from the abandoned Whitmore estate outside Black Hollow Creek. According to local rumors, the nursery where it had been stored remained locked for nearly 90 years after a child vanished there. Several workers refused to move the dollhouse because they claimed tiny footsteps echoed inside it after sunset. Evelyn dismissed the stories as superstition born from boredom and old-town gossip. She specialized in restoring damaged antiques, and rare Victorian pieces usually sold for excellent money online. When the bidding ended unexpectedly low, she purchased the dollhouse without hesitation. 2 movers carried it into her apartment just before midnight as rain hammered the city streets outside. The dollhouse looked even stranger beneath the weak yellow light of Evelyn's workshop. Tiny scratches covered the windows from the inside, as though miniature fingernails had clawed against the glass for years. As Evelyn began cleaning the dust from the parlor room, she noticed one wall felt oddly loose beneath her fingertips. Hidden behind the wallpaper was a narrow compartment barely large enough to fit 2 fingers inside. She pulled out a tiny leather diary bound with cracked black thread. The book smelled of mildew and something faintly rotten that reminded her of flowers left too long at a funeral. Written across the first page in delicate handwriting were the words, "For the deaths that are coming." Beneath the sentence appeared the date, October 3rd, 1891. Evelyn laughed nervously and assumed the diary belonged to a dramatic Victorian child obsessed with ghost stories. She flipped through several brittle pages filled with names, locations, and descriptions of horrific accidents. One entry described a woman falling beneath a subway train while screaming for someone named Daniel. A chill spread across Evelyn's body when she suddenly remembered reading that exact story online 3 days earlier. The victim's name had been Elise Turner, identical to the name written in the diary. Even the station location and the broken silver bracelet mentioned in the article matched perfectly. Thunder rattled the apartment windows while Evelyn stared at the impossible entry with growing fear. She checked the next page and found another prediction dated for the following night. It described a restaurant fire that would trap 7 people behind a locked kitchen door. Uneasy but unable to ignore the warning, Evelyn searched local news stations for any report connected to the address. Nothing appeared online, and she slowly convinced herself the coincidence meant nothing. Still, she could not stop glancing toward the dollhouse sitting silently behind her. At exactly 2:13 in the morning, Evelyn's phone vibrated violently against the table beside the diary. A breaking news alert flashed across the screen describing a deadly restaurant fire downtown with 7 confirmed fatalities. When Evelyn turned toward the dollhouse again, she noticed one tiny upstairs window was suddenly glowing with faint yellow light. Evelyn barely slept after the restaurant fire because the glowing window inside the dollhouse remained lit until sunrise. Every time she closed her eyes, she imagined tiny figures moving behind the dusty curtains upstairs. By morning, dark circles hung beneath her eyes like bruises forming from exhaustion and fear. The news coverage grew worse throughout the day as reporters described victims trapped behind a jammed kitchen door. Evelyn listened in silence while comparing each detail to the diary entry lying open across her desk. Every horrifying detail matched perfectly, including the exact time the flames first erupted. She considered calling the police but quickly realized nobody would believe her story. A diary from 1891 predicting modern tragedies sounded insane even inside her own thoughts. Instead, she locked the book inside a cabinet and left for work, hoping distance would calm her nerves. Evelyn restored antique furniture at a cramped workshop downtown beside an aging cemetery. The building constantly smelled of wood polish, dust, and rainwater leaking through cracked pipes overhead. Normally, the familiar atmosphere comforted her, but that morning every shadow seemed unusually deep and watchful. Her co-worker Marcus noticed her shaking hands while she repaired an old rocking chair near the back room. He joked that she looked like someone had died in her apartment overnight. The comment made Evelyn freeze so suddenly that her screwdriver slipped across the floor. During lunch break, Evelyn secretly searched the diary online, hoping someone else had discovered similar entries before. Instead, she found old newspaper archives discussing Clara Whitmore, the missing daughter of the estate where the dollhouse originated. Several articles described Clara as deeply disturbed and obsessed with recording violent deaths in miniature notebooks. One article mentioned that servants often heard Clara whispering to the dollhouse, as if speaking with another child hidden inside it. After her disappearance in 1892, investigators discovered dozens of pages describing tragedies that had not happened yet. The diaries supposedly vanished before police could preserve them as evidence. A sudden power outage darkened the workshop before Evelyn could continue reading further. The lights flickered violently while distant thunder rolled across the city outside. For several seconds, she could hear faint knocking sounds coming from somewhere beneath the floorboards. Marcus laughed nervously and blamed the ancient wiring inside the building. As the lights returned, he pointed toward Evelyn's workbench with visible confusion. The antique rocking chair she had been repairing moments earlier was now slowly rocking by itself. Evelyn left work early with growing panic tightening inside her chest like a fist. The moment she entered her apartment, she sensed something had changed in the room. The dollhouse sat facing the opposite direction from where she clearly remembered leaving it. Worse still, the tiny furniture inside appeared rearranged into unfamiliar positions. Miniature dining chairs surrounded the table, as though invisible guests had gathered there after she left. On the second floor, one tiny bedroom door now stood slightly open. Hands trembling, Evelyn unlocked the cabinet and opened the diary again, despite every instinct telling her not to. A fresh entry had appeared on a previously blank page, written in wet-looking black ink. At the bottom of the prediction, beneath the description of another approaching death, one sentence waited for her like a whisper from the dark. Evelyn finally opened the door tonight. The sentence haunted Evelyn for 2 sleepless nights, until curiosity finally overcame her fear. Every creak inside the apartment sounded like footsteps, circling closer through the darkness. Even the soft ticking of her kitchen clock began resembling tiny fingernails tapping against wood. Rain poured endlessly across the city, while Evelyn buried herself in research about the Whitmore family. She visited libraries, searched newspaper archives, and contacted local historians, desperate for answers about Clara Whitmore. The deeper she searched, the stranger the story became. Clara had been born into enormous wealth during the winter of 1879 at the Whitmore estate near Black Hollow Creek. Family portraits showed a pale little girl holding the same Victorian dollhouse, now sitting inside Evelyn's apartment. In every photograph, Clara's expression appeared cold and unsettlingly adult for a child her age. According to old servant testimonies, Clara claimed she could see people dying before it happened. She described accidents in horrifying detail days before they occurred across neighboring towns. At first, her parents dismissed the predictions as childish imagination until the deaths kept becoming real. One servant named Margaret Doyle wrote that Clara often locked herself inside the nursery for hours speaking to invisible visitors. At night, whispers supposedly echoed through the walls, while tiny shadows moved beneath the nursery door. Several maids quit after hearing children laughing inside empty rooms long after midnight. Evelyn discovered another disturbing report buried within an 1892 newspaper clipping. 3 weeks before Clara vanished, a carriage driver crashed into Black Hollow Bridge exactly as the child predicted. Witnesses later claimed Clara smiled during the funeral procession as though she had expected every scream. The final report about Clara's disappearance chilled Evelyn more than anything else she had read so far. Her parents found the nursery completely empty, except for the dollhouse sitting in the center of the room. Investigators also discovered muddy child-sized footprints leading into the walls themselves, before abruptly stopping. That evening, Evelyn returned home carrying photocopies of the articles and a growing sense of dread. The apartment smelled strangely different the moment she stepped inside. A faint odor of wet soil and decaying roses drifted through the air from the direction of the dollhouse. The tiny bedroom door upstairs now stood fully open, as though waiting for her arrival. Evelyn knelt beside the dollhouse and noticed something hidden deep inside the miniature nursery. A tiny porcelain doll wearing a black dress sat upright on the bed, staring directly toward her. Evelyn swore the doll had not been there before. Its cracked porcelain face resembled Clara Whitmore from the old family photographs with terrifying accuracy. Around its neck hung an impossibly tiny silver key darkened with age. Heart pounding violently, Evelyn used tweezers to remove the doll from the room. The moment she touched it, a child's whisper breathed softly beside her ear from nowhere. A trembling voice murmured for chilling words through the darkness. "She sees you now." Panicked, Evelyn dropped the doll onto the floor beside her desk. The silver key rolled beneath the couch, while the porcelain figure landed facing the ceiling. Then, slowly and impossibly, the doll's head turned toward Evelyn, with a sharp cracking sound from inside its tiny neck. Evelyn stumbled backward so violently that she struck the edge of her kitchen counter. The porcelain doll remained motionless on the floor, but its dark painted eyes still seemed fixed directly upon her. Somewhere inside the apartment, a child quietly giggled before the sound vanished into silence. She forced herself to breathe, while convincing her trembling mind that exhaustion was distorting reality. Lack of sleep, constant fear, and obsession with the diary had pushed her toward hallucinations. Yet deep inside, Evelyn already knew something unnatural had entered her life the moment she brought the dollhouse home. The tiny silver key remained beneath the couch, where it had rolled after the doll fell. Evelyn retrieved it carefully, using a ruler because she could not bear touching it directly again. Strange symbols were carved into the metal, like twisted roots wrapping around each other. That night, she locked the dollhouse inside her storage room and pushed heavy furniture against the door. She even wrapped the diary in garbage bags before burying it beneath old boxes in the closet. For the first time in days, she believed she might finally sleep peacefully. At exactly 3:07 in the morning, a loud crash jolted her awake from shallow sleep. The apartment lights flickered while freezing air swept through the hallway outside her bedroom. From somewhere beyond the darkness came the slow creaking sound of a rocking chair moving steadily back and forth. Evelyn grabbed a flashlight and followed the sound with terrified, careful steps. The storage room door now stood wide open, despite the furniture still blocking most of the entrance. Inside, the dollhouse rested in the center of the floor, exactly facing her bedroom door. Every tiny room inside the dollhouse glowed faintly with pale yellow light. Miniature shadows moved behind the curtains, as though invisible people wandered through the halls. Then Evelyn noticed something far worse, waiting inside the tiny dining room downstairs. A miniature figure dressed in Marcus's work clothes sat collapsed across the table. Its tiny head rested in a pool of dark red paint spread across the wooden floorboards. Beside the figure, a miniature screwdriver, identical to Marcus's favorite tool, lay broken in half. Evelyn rushed for her phone with panic, crushing the air from her lungs. Before she could call him, the device vibrated violently in her shaking hands. Marcus's name flashed across the screen, followed immediately by a voicemail notification. His trembling voice barely remained coherent beneath distant screaming and blaring sirens. Marcus explained that shelving had collapsed unexpectedly inside the workshop restoration room. Just before the message ended, he whispered weakly that something had pushed him from behind. The next morning, police confirmed Marcus died from severe head injuries before paramedics reached the building. Evelyn sat frozen at her kitchen table while reporters described the accident on television. Every detail matched the miniature death scene inside the dollhouse with horrifying precision. Unable to bear the nightmare any longer, Evelyn grabbed the diary and threw it into her fireplace. Flames swallowed the brittle pages instantly, yet the book did not burn or darken at all. As the fire roared higher around it, fresh words slowly appeared across an empty page. Evelyn's house is almost ready now. The message remained on the diary page long after the fire died into glowing embers. Evelyn stared at the untouched book resting among blackened ashes, while fear hollowed her stomach like rot spreading through wood. Outside her apartment windows, heavy fog swallowed the city streets beneath the early morning darkness. She could no longer deny that something inside the dollhouse controlled the predictions. Every attempt to destroy the diary only seemed to strengthen whatever force lingered within it. Worse still, the dollhouse itself appeared different every single day. Tiny details inside now mirrored Evelyn's apartment with terrifying accuracy. A miniature green mug suddenly appeared beside the tiny kitchen sink, exactly matching the chipped cup she used every morning. Even the crooked hallway picture frame she had never repaired now existed inside the dollhouse too. Sleep became impossible as whispers drifted through the apartment each night. Sometimes the voices sounded like children softly repeating her name from behind the walls. Other times, Evelyn heard distant sobbing coming from inside the dollhouse nursery upstairs. Determined to uncover the truth, she examined every inch of the miniature structure beneath harsh workshop lights. Hidden beneath a removable staircase, she discovered an impossibly narrow trapdoor concealed beneath fake carpeting. The silver key from Clara's porcelain doll fit perfectly into the tiny lock. Hands shaking violently, Evelyn turned the key and heard a faint click echo inside the dollhouse. A hidden section of floor slowly lifted upward, revealing a staircase descending into darkness. Cold air carrying the smell of wet earth escaped from the opening like breath from a grave. Using a magnifying flashlight, Evelyn peered into the secret basement, hidden beneath the miniature house. The tiny underground room resembled an old funeral chamber, lined with black wallpaper and strange symbols. At the center stood a coffin-sized bed, carved from dark wood stained, nearly black with age. Lying inside the tiny bed was a miniature replica of Evelyn herself. The figure wore the exact same grey sweater she currently had on inside the apartment. Its tiny hands rested across its chest, while its painted eyes remained closed in death-like stillness. Beside the miniature body rested several brittle diary pages Evelyn had never seen before. The handwriting belonged to Clara Whitmore, though the words looked rushed and desperate, unlike earlier entries. Clara claimed the house spoke to her through the walls and demanded new deaths constantly. According to the pages, Clara originally believed the spirit helped her predict tragedies to save innocent lives. Instead, every warning only fed the unseen entity living beneath the dollhouse. The more deaths recorded inside the diary, the stronger the thing became. Clara finally realized the spirit could not leave unless another keeper replaced her. She described hearing scratching sounds inside her bedroom walls every night, while tiny hands reached through cracks in the plaster. Her final sentence ended abruptly with the words, "It wants my place beside the house forever." As Evelyn lowered the diary pages with numb horror, a loud knock suddenly echoed from somewhere inside her apartment. The sound came not from the front door, but from the dollhouse basement itself. Then the miniature figure lying in the coffin-sized bed slowly opened its tiny painted eyes. The miniature version of Evelyn stared upward from the tiny coffin bed with glassy painted eyes that should not have moved. Its lips slowly parted into a thin smile, while faint scratching sounds echoed through the apartment walls. Somewhere above the storm outside, a child began softly humming an old lullaby. Evelyn slammed the basement door shut and stumbled away from the dollhouse in terror. The miniature lights inside every room flickered wildly like candles struggling against invisible breath. Thunder rattled the windows hard enough to shake framed pictures from the apartment walls. Her phone displayed no signal despite the city normally having perfect reception during storms. Even the apartment hallway beyond her front door had fallen unnaturally silent and empty. It felt as though the entire building had been sealed away from the rest of the world. Desperate to escape, Evelyn grabbed her coat and rushed toward the exit. Before she reached the door, tiny footsteps raced rapidly across the ceiling overhead. They sounded exactly like children sprinting barefoot through narrow wooden halls directly above her head. The apartment lights suddenly died, plunging everything into suffocating darkness. Only the dollhouse remained illuminated now with warm yellow light glowing from every miniature window. Through the tiny glass panes, Evelyn could see shadowy figures slowly moving between the rooms. The diary lay open by itself, on the floor beside the dollhouse. Fresh ink spread across the final page, as though invisible hands continued writing in real time. Evelyn forced herself closer and read the first line, despite every instinct begging her to run. The entry described the storm currently raging outside her apartment building. It mentioned the broken hallway picture frame lying shattered near her kitchen, exactly as it now appeared. Then the writing continued, describing Evelyn herself, standing frozen beside the glowing dollhouse. Her breathing became shallow as the words kept appearing sentence by sentence before her eyes. The diary predicted every movement seconds before she made it, including the moment she backed slowly away from the nursery window upstairs. Behind the tiny curtains, Clara Whitmore's porcelain face waited motionless in the darkness. A loud bang exploded from inside Evelyn's bedroom, followed by the sound of furniture scraping violently across the floor. The whispers inside the walls rose into excited childlike laughter, circling through the apartment from every direction. Suddenly the bedroom door creaked open by itself. Inside the room stood dozens of tiny muddy footprints covering the carpet and walls. They climbed upward across the ceiling like children had crawled there upside down in the darkness. At the center of the bed sat the porcelain doll holding the diary's final page in its tiny hands. The last unfinished sentence slowly completed itself in dripping black ink, while Evelyn watched helplessly. She finally understands the house belongs to her now. Then every miniature light inside the dollhouse went dark simultaneously. The storm ended shortly before sunrise as police officers forced open Evelyn's silent apartment after neighbors reported screams during the night. They found the rooms completely abandoned except for overturned furniture and muddy child-sized footprints covering the walls. Resting quietly in the center of the apartment stood the Victorian dollhouse, and inside the upstairs nursery sat a new miniature figure of Evelyn beside the tiny leather diary waiting for the next owner.